Cancel the $4 billion deal now. Marcus Hayes's voice was calm, but the words detonated like thunder across the ballroom. 100 crystal glasses paused mid-air. Laughter broke off mid-breath. For a split second, silence reigned, thick and absolute. But rewind 5 minutes, and you'll see why the room gasped. Look at him covered in cake, acting like he belongs here. Victoria Van Allen sneered, her tone dripping with amusement. Her words cracked through the air sharper than the shatter of porcelain. Behind her, a circle of heirs and debutantes burst into gleeful laughter. Phones were raised, capturing every second the billionaire dressed in understatement, humiliated under frosting. Marcus didn't move. He didn't wipe his face. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there, as if anchored to the marble floor, a storm building behind his stillness. This wasn't just a gala. This was the Van Allen family's legacy event, a theater of wealth and image. Tonight was meant to be the final step in a $4 billion merger between Hayes Global and the Van Allen Group. Yet not one person laughing in that chandelier-lit hall seemed to realize that the man they mocked was the very deal they toasted to. Victoria, satin gown shimmering under the lights, tilted her glass with cruel delight. "This isn't your world. People like you don't last in rooms like this." She lifted her champagne, and with one deliberate flick, golden liquid splashed across his chest. The crowd howled again. But every laugh was borrowed time. Because Marcus had been here before different faces, same smirk, same assumption. At 25, they called him too young. At 30, too reckless. At 35, too black for the boardroom. Now at 42, with empires under his name, they still thought cake could erase him. In the corner, a server froze mid-step, tray trembling. A journalist lowered her phone, eyes narrowing in sudden recognition. Somewhere by the string quartet, a guest whispered, "Isn't that Marcus Hayes?" The name rippled quietly, but the roar of privilege still drowned it out. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus. The ballroom thought the frosting on his face was the punchline. They didn't see that it was the prelude. Because Marcus Hayes wasn't about to be laughed out of this room. He was about to end it. 5 minutes earlier, before the cake and the laughter, the ballroom was flawless. Strings played near the stage, crystal chandeliers painted the room in gold, and every guest looked like wealth had been stitched into their bones. The Van Allen Gala wasn't just a party, it was a ritual. Legacy families shook hands, posed for photos, whispered about alliances. Every glance was currency, every smile was strategy. And then Marcus Hayes walked in. No entourage, no designer watch, no flash of labels or logos, just a charcoal suit tailored sharp but quiet, polished shoes, and the kind of presence that didn't need an announcement. He held no glass, carried no folder. His only accessory was stillness, as if he had stepped into this glittering arena not to perform but to observe. A few eyes slid over him without pause. Others paused just long enough to measure him, dismiss him, file him away as someone's guest. He was too understated for their hierarchy, too calm for their attention, and that was intentional. Marcus knew this world thrived on image, and tonight he had chosen invisibility as his armor. But invisibility has a price. Near the bar, Victoria Van Allen spotted him. Heiress to the Van Allen Group, the unofficial queen of the room, she was used to deciding who belonged. Her gaze lingered, narrowed, sharpened. To her, Marcus wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a deal-maker. He was simply an intruder who didn't match the image her family wanted on display. And once she decided he didn't belong, the room followed. She approached with her entourage trailing like satellites, champagne in hand, satin gown whispering across the marble floor. She smiled the kind of smile that cuts before it charms. "Enjoying the view?" she asked, loud enough for a nearby cluster of heirs to hear. They chuckled on cue. Marcus offered a simple nod. Nothing more. That silence gave her space to escalate. With one swift motion, she lifted a slice of cake from a passing tray and smashed it across his face. Frosting clung to his jaw. Cream slid down his lapel. Gasps scattered through the air. Then came the laughter, loud, cruel, echoing off chandeliers that once seemed so regal but now trembled under the weight of mockery. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even reach for a napkin. Because Marcus Hayes hadn't come here to blend in, he had come here to see the truth of this family's legacy, and in one strike of cake, they had given it to him. And that was the moment the night began to change. The laughter didn't fade. It spread. Like champagne bubbles rising too fast, the sound filled every corner of the ballroom, unrestrained and indulgent. Guests who hadn't even seen the cake strike joined in, laughing simply because others were. To them, Marcus wasn't a man. He was a spectacle. Victoria leaned closer, her voice sugar on the surface, venom underneath. Men like you show up, hoping to be noticed. But not here, not in my family's house. Her words weren't whispered. They were projected, loud enough for the string quartet to falter mid-note. Her friends circled tighter, phones lifted higher. One heir muttered into his camera, "This is what happens when you sneak into the wrong room," and laughter flared again. A girl in sequins smirked. "He looks more like the help than a guest." Marcus didn't respond. His silence unsettled some, emboldened others. A waiter paused near the back wall, tray trembling, eyes darting between Marcus and Victoria. His lips moved, barely audible. "That's Marcus Hayes," but his voice was swallowed by the crowd. Victoria wasn't finished. She plucked a champagne flute from a passing tray and tilted it just so. The golden liquid cascaded down Marcus's suit, soaking fabric that had once been immaculate. A collective gasp followed, half shock, half delight. Someone shouted, "Oh, she did not!" Another voice, male and sharp with entitlement, laughed. "Guess he'll think twice before crashing a real party." Oh. The quartet stopped altogether now. Silence tried to push its way in, but privilege smothered it with another round of laughter. Marcus still didn't flinch. His eyes, steady as stone, locked on Victoria's. That look unnerved her, so she went further. "You think money buys entry? You think ambition erases bloodlines?" She leaned in close, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. "Men like you don't belong. Not in this room. Not in this city. Not in this family's legacy. And yet, as she spoke, murmurs rippled at the edges of the room. Recognition was dawning. A journalist lowered her camera, brow furrowing. An investor whispered to his wife, "Is that the Hayes from Forbes?" A young analyst near the stage muttered, "That's him. That's the deal. Why isn't anyone stopping her?" The ballroom was splitting in two, one half laughing, the other half realizing they were laughing at the wrong man. But Marcus stayed silent, because silence wasn't weakness. Tonight, silence was a fuse, and Victoria had just lit it. The ballroom roared with laughter, but Marcus did not move. Not a wipe of his sleeve, not a twitch of anger. His stillness cut sharper than any outburst could have. It unsettled the air itself, as though the chandeliers above suddenly weighed heavier, their glow dimmer. Victoria smirked, emboldened by the silence. "See? Nothing to say. That's what I thought." She turned slightly, inviting the crowd to laugh with her again. A few did. Others hesitated, eyes lingering on Marcus as if waiting for a response. But Marcus wasn't giving them a scene. He wasn't giving them performance. He was giving them silence, the kind that builds pressure in a room until it forces someone else to break first. Inside that silence, his mind wasn't empty. It was replaying. 20 years ago, age 22, his first real pitch meeting. He had walked into a conference room with binders full of numbers and a fire in his chest. The banker on the other side glanced at his skin before glancing at the numbers and said, "You don't look like the man running these numbers." They dismissed him in 12 minutes flat. At 27, after his first major acquisition, he tried to celebrate at a rooftop bar. A doorman looked him over, shook his head, and said, "Not tonight." He had watched 3 men in suits walk right past him into the same bar. And at 31, when Hayes Global hit its first billion in revenue, a journalist interviewing him asked if he had a mentor who really owned the company behind the scenes, as if his success couldn't possibly be his. Now, at 42, it was cake on his face. Same doubt, same smirk, same attempt to erase his belonging. But erasure only works if you let it. Marcus inhaled slowly, the sound lost under the ballroom's murmur. He let the frosting sit on his skin like paint, like war paint. His calm was so precise it pulled some guests into discomfort. A man near the stage whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything?" His wife leaned closer, "Because he doesn't need to." Victoria, misreading the silence, pressed harder. "Do you understand yet? This world doesn't want you. It never will." Her laughter was loud, forced now, brittle at the edges. Marcus blinked once, slowly. Then he lowered his gaze, not in shame, but in calculation, because stillness was not surrender. It was strategy. And the longer he stayed still, the closer this room came to tearing itself apart. The laughter was starting to fracture. It no longer rolled in one smooth wave. It cracked, split, and faltered in the corners where recognition began to creep in. Near the catering table, a server no older than 20 froze with a tray in his hands. His eyes widened, and he whispered to the colleague beside him, "That's Marcus Hayes." The words slipped out like a secret he hadn't meant to say, but they landed on the ears of a journalist standing nearby. She lowered her phone, brows knitting tight. Across the room, an investor in a midnight blue tux frowned, leaning toward his wife. "If that's who I think it is, this isn't just reckless. This is suicide." She looked at him, lips parting, but didn't answer. Her gaze stayed locked on Marcus, who still hadn't moved. Phones were rising now, not just in mockery, but in quiet documentation. Some guests filmed with wide-eyed shock rather than smug delight. The angle of their cameras told a different story, less entertainment, more evidence. Victoria noticed, and it rattled her. She spun to the crowd, voice pitched higher than before. "Don't be fooled. He's no one. He's nothing. Just another wannabe trying to sneak into a world that doesn't want him." Her laugh rang out, brittle. Her friends chimed in, but their tones wavered. They had started to hear the murmurs, too. And then came the first spark. From the edge of the dance floor, a young analyst in a borrowed tux raised his voice just enough to cut through. "I know who that is," he said firmly. "That's Marcus Hayes, Hayes Global." His words weren't shouted, but they hit like a bell rung in a church, clear, undeniable. The crowd shifted. A few guests stiffened. A few lowered their glasses. The name carried weight, even to those who wanted to pretend it didn't. Victoria's jaw tightened. "No," she snapped, spinning toward him. "You don't know what you're talking about." But the crack had already split the surface. The journalist raised her phone again, this time speaking into it. "This is real. I'm at the Van Allen Gala, and something is happening here." Her voice shook, not from fear, but from the recognition of a story too big to ignore. Marcus remained silent, frosting still clinging to his jawline, his suit damp with champagne. He didn't need to confirm the analyst's words. He didn't need to defend himself. The room was beginning to do it for him. Stillness had worked, the fuse was burning, and the crowd was about to explode. Victoria's laugh snapped back, sharp and metallic, covering the tremor in her voice. "Marcus Hayes?" she scoffed, dragging out the name like it was dirt. "Please, if he were really Marcus Hayes, he wouldn't be standing here dripping cake like a street clown." She swirled her champagne, raised her chin, and smiled wide enough for the cameras. But her words didn't land as cleanly this time. Too many guests had already heard the name. Too many were whispering. The ballroom was splitting into two realities, those still clinging to laughter, and those realizing they might be laughing at the wrong man. One of her friends chimed in, desperate to keep the momentum. "He probably forged an invitation," he muttered, but his voice cracked, the certainty gone. Another added, "People like him sneak into places like this all the time." The words hung heavy, ugly, exposing more than they excused. Near the stage, the young analyst spoke louder, emboldened now. "I told you that's him. That's the CEO. I saw his Forbes cover." His voice cut across the music, across the murmurs, and for a moment the ballroom felt like a courtroom. Victoria's eyes flashed. "You don't know him," she barked back. "You don't know this world, and neither does he." The journalist finally stepped forward, camera held high. "I know enough, and I know this doesn't look like business. This looks like humiliation." A hush rippled. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others crossed their arms tighter. Marcus still hadn't moved. The frosting on his face was starting to dry, the champagne stain spreading slowly across his lapel. But he didn't look broken. He looked anchored, and that was beginning to scare people more than if he had shouted. Victoria tried one last strike. She leaned closer, her voice low but audible to half the room. "You don't belong here. You never will. Money can't buy bloodlines. It can't buy legacy." The words drew a few nervous chuckles but no applause. The laughter was thinning. Even the string quartet, still frozen in silence, refused to pick up their bows. From the back, an older guest, an investor with white hair and tired eyes, spoke without raising his voice. "Legacy doesn't humiliate people. Legacy protects them. His words cut deeper than Victoria's smirk. Heads turned toward him, then back to Marcus. The air shifted. No one was laughing anymore. Not fully. And Marcus? He remained silent, letting every word stack higher, waiting for the weight of the room to collapse under its own bias. The ballroom had grown uneasy, but Victoria couldn't stop. The silence pressing in on her only made her louder, sharper, more desperate to hold control. She reached across the table, snatched another glass of champagne, and this time poured it deliberately, slow and theatrical, down Marcus's shoulder until it dripped from his cuff. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even some of her friends flinched at the spectacle. "Look at him," she sneered, turning her face so the cameras caught her profile. "Still standing there like he matters, like he deserves this room, but all he really deserves is the door." The words landed like stones. Then she crossed the line. With her manicured hand, she plucked the linen napkin from the table, balled it tight, and shoved it against Marcus's chest. "Wipe yourself off and leave before someone mistakes you for a guest who belongs." The room stilled. Phones caught the motion instantly. A chorus of clicks and the low hum of recording apps activated in unison. Somewhere near the stage, a woman whispered, "Did she just put her hands on him?" Another voice hissed back, "She's insane. Does she even know who he is?" Victoria's friends weren't laughing anymore. Their smiles had thinned, eyes darting nervously toward the older investors, the journalists, the staff. Even privilege had its limits, and she had just overstepped them. But Marcus still didn't move. His eyes locked on hers, calm, unflinching, bottomless. That silence felt heavier now, heavier than the chandeliers, heavier than the marble under their feet. It made her voice tremble, though she fought to hide it. "You hear me?" She pushed again, louder this time, though her laugh cracked at the edges. "You don't belong here. You never will. You're just a fraud in a suit." Fraud. The word carried like smoke, curling through the crowd. It wasn't just insult anymore. It was accusation. It was venom that could stain reputations if left unchecked. And that was when the shift became irreversible. A woman near the bar, gray hair, pearls, a veteran donor to the Van Allens, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's not a fraud. That's Marcus Hayes. And if you've just called him one, you've made the biggest mistake of your life." Gasps, murmurs, camera zoomed closer. Victoria blinked, stunned. For the first time all evening, the certainty in her eyes faltered. Marcus didn't answer her accusation. He didn't need to, because the crowd had just answered for him, and the judgment in their silence was heavier than anything he could have said. The ballroom was still vibrating from the word fraud when Marcus finally moved. Not with anger, not with a shout, just a slow, deliberate reach into his inside pocket. The crowd held its breath, cameras craning higher. Victoria smirked, thinking she had won. "What now?" she jeered. "Calling security? Going to beg your way back in?" Marcus said nothing. He slid out his phone, its black screen glowing to life, and pressed one button. The line clicked instantly. Somewhere across the city, a voice answered, steady, professional, waiting. Marcus's own voice was quiet. So quiet that people leaned forward to catch it. "Cancel the $4 billion deal. Now." The words detonated through the air. They weren't shouted, but they didn't need to be. They were sharp enough to slice through the murmurs, heavy enough to crash into every chest in the room. Glasses stopped mid-air. Forks hovered above plates. Even the string quartet froze with bows in hand. Victoria's laugh faltered. What are you talking about?" Marcus ended the call without another word, sliding the phone back into his pocket as if nothing had happened. But something had. The ground beneath the gala had shifted. The murmurs rose higher, a wave of disbelief and realization colliding. Near the bar, the older donor whispered to no one in particular. He wasn't bluffing. The journalist was already live streaming. "This is happening right now. Marcus Hayes just pulled out of the Van Allen merger in the middle of their own gala." Phones buzzed across the room, news alerts flashing before the ink of the moment had even dried. Guests exchanged frantic whispers. "4 billion? Did he say 4 billion? The merger's dead. She just cost them everything." Victoria's face drained of color. "No," she stammered, her bravado cracking. "You can't. You don't have the authority." Marcus finally spoke to her, his voice steady, low, undeniable. "You thought I was here to prove myself. You thought cake could erase me. But you didn't just humiliate me, Victoria. You humiliated your family. And it cost you $4 billion in less than a minute. Oh, the room gasped. Phones shook as hands struggled to keep filming. For the first time that night, Marcus moved not to leave, not to lash out, but to stand taller. And the silence that followed wasn't mockery anymore. It was recognition. The silence after Marcus's words was deafening. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it rewrites it. People stared, eyes wide, mouths half open, phones trembling in their hands. And then a woman's heels clicked against the marble, steady, deliberate. From the back of the ballroom, a tall figure stepped forward, Elena Price, Marcus's chief of staff. She had been standing quietly all evening, unremarkable to most, blending into the edges of the crowd. But now she moved with purpose, her voice cutting clean through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, tone crisp, "allow me to introduce the man you've just insulted. Marcus Hayes, founder and CEO of Hayes Global, ranked by Forbes as one of the most influential executives in the world. The man who walked into this room tonight prepared to finalize a $4 billion acquisition with the Van Allen family." Gasps rippled like a shockwave. The name landed different now. No longer a rumor whispered at the edges, but a fact declared in front of hundreds of witnesses. Phones jerked higher, capturing every angle, every stunned face. Guests who had laughed minutes earlier were now paling, their smiles collapsing into tight lines of regret. Even the string quartet lowered their instruments, staring in disbelief. Victoria froze, color draining from her face. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not, he's lying." But Marcus didn't need to answer. The crowd already had. An older investor near the stage muttered, "He's real. I've seen him in boardrooms." Another guest pulled up a photo on her phone, holding it against the air. The same face, the same eyes, on the cover of Forbes. The truth was undeniable. Victoria's friends stumbled backward, their bravado shattering. One of them whispered frantically, "She just humiliated the man holding their entire future." Another hissed, "She cost them everything." The ballroom shifted again, not just silence now, but shame. Heads bowed. Guests avoided Marcus's gaze, their earlier laughter turning into invisible chains of guilt around their throats. Elena's voice rang out once more. "You called him a fraud, but you were standing in his deal, his future, his power, and now it's gone because of you." Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked around desperately, seeking rescue in familiar faces, but found none. Even her allies were shrinking from her, unwilling to be caught on the wrong side of history. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stood, calm and unshaken, while the weight of his name did the speaking for him. The heiress had tried to turn him into a spectacle. Instead, she had turned herself into one. The name Marcus Hayes still hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The ballroom, once filled with laughter, was now a theater of panic. Conversations fractured into sharp whispers. Investors clutched their phones, already dialing frantically, voices urgent, hushed, terrified. "She killed it," one man hissed into his phone. "The deal's gone. Do you understand what this means?" Another guest backed toward the exit, muttering, "$4 billion, gone, in one night." Phones buzzed with alerts as the news spread faster than champagne bubbles. Screens glowed across the room, headlines breaking live, social feeds already streaming Victoria's humiliation frame by frame. Every angle of her cruelty was now evidence, viral and permanent. Victoria's friends retreated into the shadows, abandoning her one by one. Their earlier laughter was now a stain they couldn't scrub away. Some lowered their heads, others slipped out quietly, unwilling to stand in the fallout. And the guests who had laughed loudest? They stood frozen, faces pale, gripping their glasses like lifelines. One whispered, "We laughed at him, on camera." Another choked, "The whole world's going to see." The journalist's live stream surged with viewers, comments flooding in, "Unbelievable. She just cost her family billions. Justice in real time." The chat scrolled so fast the words blurred, but the sentiment was unmistakable. The room had turned, the world was watching. At the edge of the dance floor, the young analyst who had first spoken Marcus's name now stood taller, his voice steady. "You all saw it. You all heard it. Don't pretend you didn't." His words sliced through the tension, and no one dared argue. The older donor shook her head in disgust, her pearl necklace catching the light. "I've supported this family for decades. she said loudly. But legacy built on humiliation isn't legacy at all. It's rot. Applause broke soft at first, then louder, as scattered guests clapped, not for spectacle but for truth. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough to tilt the room, enough to make the shame choke Victoria like a collar. Her breath came shallow now. The heiress who had commanded the spotlight was drowning under it. She tried to speak, to summon the arrogance that had once carried her, but her voice cracked into silence. And in that silence, Marcus stood steady, untouched, the eye of the storm. He hadn't needed to move. The room had moved for him. The applause faded into silence, heavy and suffocating. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on Marcus now, not with ridicule, not with doubt, but with something sharper, recognition. He reached for his phone again. One tap, a line connected. His voice steady, calm, almost surgical. "Elena, execute the withdrawal. Terminate all pending contracts with the Van Allen Group, effective immediately." Across the room, Elena Price lifted her own phone, confirming into her earpiece. "Understood. Hayes Global is disengaging. $4 billion deal canceled. Systems updated." Her voice carried, deliberate enough that no one could mistake her meaning. The words hit the ballroom like a gavel. Gasps erupted. A banker stumbled backward, muttering, "They're finished." An investor slammed his glass on the table, phone pressed to his ear. "Sell. Sell now." The ripples were instant wealth unraveling in real time. Victoria staggered, her silver gown suddenly feeling like chains. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You can't. You wouldn't." Marcus's eyes met hers. "You thought this was about me. It never was. It was about respect. And tonight, you showed the world you had none." Her lips trembled. "We can fix this." He cut her off with a glance so cold it silenced her mid-breath. "There are no second chances. Not when billions are at stake. Not when dignity is on trial." Around them, chaos deepened. Phones buzzed with breaking news. Hayes Global terminates merger after public humiliation. Screens lit up with headlines already circulating on social feeds. Guests whispered frantically, trying to distance themselves from the heiress unraveling before them. One of her allies reached out weakly. "Marcus, surely we can—" "No," he said flatly. "Your loyalty was to her laughter, not to justice. You chose your side." His assistant stepped forward, handing him a folder. Marcus didn't open it. He didn't need to. "Every Van Allen contract with Hayes Global is frozen. Every tie is cut. You'll find your access revoked before you finish your next glass of champagne." A hush fell so deep the chandeliers seemed to hum with it. Victoria's voice broke. "You don't understand what you've done." Marcus's reply was iron. "I understand exactly. I've ended a partnership with a family that mistook cruelty for power. That's not a loss. That's protection." The punishment was complete, not loud, not violent, just final. And in that finality, the ballroom bent under the weight of irreversible truth. The ballroom no longer belonged to the Van Allens. It belonged to silence, to shame, and to the man they had tried to erase. Marcus stood in the center, frosting still clinging to his lapel, champagne soaking his cuff, yet he looked untouchable. Around him, the chatter had died, the arrogance drained. Guests who had once laughed now shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his gaze. Phones still hovered, but not to mock, only to capture history being made. He let the moment breathe, the weight of it pressing down on every gilded corner of the room. And then, finally, he spoke. "You thought this was just cake," he said, his voice low, resonant, steady as a verdict. "But what you really smashed wasn't dessert, it was $4 billion. You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake." No one dared interrupt. He turned his eyes to Victoria, who stood pale, trembling, the queen of a kingdom collapsing beneath her feet. "You wanted the world to see me humiliated," Marcus continued. "Now the world sees you ruined, and unlike cake, reputations don't wash off." The words hung heavy, and even the chandeliers seemed to bow under them. He gave no speech about forgiveness, no lecture about legacy, just truth, sharpened and final. Then, without wiping the frosting, without straightening his suit, Marcus Hayes turned toward the grand doors. Elena fell in step behind him. The crowd instinctively parted, a corridor of silence opening in his path. Some guests lowered their heads in shame, others clapped quietly, reverently. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. At the threshold, he paused once. His final words carried across the marble, cutting clean through the stillness. Justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand. With that, Marcus walked out of the ballroom, leaving the Van Allens in ruins and the world watching. The night had begun with laughter. It ended with legacy,